That evening began like so many others, quietly and without warning, the kind that feels ordinary until it splits your life into a before and an after. I was standing in my small kitchen, the light above the sink flickering the way it always did when the weather turned cold. A pot of soup simmered gently, filling the air with the familiar smell of onions and bay leaves. My knee ached from the surgery I'd had months earlier, and I moved slowly, carefully, as if even the house itself required permission from my body to exist around me. When my phone rang, I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at the screen. My son's name lit up, bright and bold, and for a brief second my heart lifted. We hadn't spoken properly in days. Since his marriage, calls had become shorter, more formal, as if he were checking off a duty rather than reaching for comfort. Still, I smiled. A mother's hope is stubborn like that. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, already imagining he might ask how I was, or tell me about work, or even complain about something trivial the way he used to. He didn't greet me back. He went straight in, his voice tight, controlled. "Mom, we need to talk." The word need always carries weight. It rarely arrives alone. I turned down the stove and sat at the table, my back straightening instinctively, preparing for impact. "All right," I said. "What's wrong?" "You need to apologize to her." Just like that. No context. No explanation. As if the matter were already decided and my role was simply to comply. I felt a slow, creeping chill spread through my chest. I knew exactly who he meant. There was only one her in his life now who carried that kind of authority. His mother-in-law. From the moment I met her, something about her had unsettled me. She was polite in the way people are polite when they are assessing you, cataloging your flaws with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. At the wedding, she hugged me tightly, too tightly, whispering compliments that felt rehearsed. She asked questions that sounded innocent, but landed like traps. Where I lived, how much space I had, whether I still worked, whether I'd adjusted to living alone after my husband died. Each question reminded me subtly that in her eyes, I was something outdated, something inconvenient. "I won't," I said, before he could add another word. The firmness of my own voice surprised me. It wasn't anger that spoke, but certainty. I'd spent too many years swallowing words to make others comfortable. That reflex was gone now. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a long exhale. "Mom," he said slowly, "the way one speaks to a difficult child, you embarrassed her." The word embarrassed echoed in my head. Embarrassed for whom? For telling the truth. For refusing to laugh at a joke that diminished my son's life before marriage. I remembered the dinner clearly, the polished table, the expensive wine, the way everyone leaned in when she spoke. How she had laughed lightly and said, "Well, at least now he knows what real living looks like. He escaped a lot, didn't he?" And how all eyes had turned to me, waiting to see if I'd accept my place in that narrative. "I didn't embarrass her," I replied. "I corrected her." "You could have stayed quiet," he said. "You didn't have to say anything." Those words hurt more than the accusation. Stayed quiet, as if my silence were expected, as if my dignity were optional, as if years of struggle, sacrifice, and love could be erased for the sake of someone else's comfort. She's very upset, he continued. She thinks you look down on her. This is causing tension at home. At home, not my home. Not the place where I'd raised him, patched his knees, stayed up through fevers and heartbreaks. Another home now held priority. Another woman's feelings outweighed my truth. I didn't insult her, I said carefully. I said your father was an engineer because he was. I said you were raised with dignity because you were. Well, she felt attacked, he replied. And honestly, Mom, you have to understand she's sensitive. Sensitive. The word tasted bitter. Sensitive people usually don't humiliate others publicly. They don't frame someone else's life as something to escape. Just apologize, he said again, his voice tightening. Say you're sorry for how it came out. It'll smooth things over. Do it for me. There it was, the real request. Not justice, not understanding. Peace, purchased with my self-respect. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I saw him as a boy, standing up for a classmate who was being bullied, telling me proudly later that he couldn't stay quiet when something was wrong. I wondered when that boy learned that silence was sometimes demanded, not chosen. I won't, I said softly. His patience snapped. Why are you being so stubborn? You always do this. You always think you're right. The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. I did think I was right about this, but not out of pride, out of principle. I'm not apologizing for telling the truth, I said. And I'm not apologizing for defending you. There was another pause, heavier this time. I could almost hear him recalculating, deciding whether to push harder or retreat. That's selfish, he said finally. You don't see what position you're putting me in. I did see it. I just refused to be the solution to a problem I didn't create. That's when the words came. 3 of them, quiet, unplanned, unstoppable. I raised better. The silence that followed was thick, almost physical. I imagined his face, the shock, the offense. Those words weren't just a refusal. They were a mirror. What did you say? He asked. I raised you better than to ask your mother to apologize for her dignity, I replied. My hands were trembling now, but my voice held steady. If your peace depends on me shrinking myself, then that peace is built on something rotten. His response was sharp, defensive. He said I was ruining his marriage, that his wife was crying, that her mother felt disrespected in her own home, that everyone thought I was cold, ungrateful, difficult. I listened. I didn't interrupt. With every word, I felt the distance between us grow, brick by brick. When he finally stopped, I said only one thing. I won't call her, and I won't apologize. He hung up without saying goodbye. The days that followed were quiet in a way that hurt. No messages, no check-ins. The silence wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. I saw pieces of his life through others, photos posted online, gatherings I wasn't invited to, smiles that didn't include me. I told myself I'd done the right thing. I repeated it like a prayer. But at night, when the house settled and memories crept in, I wondered how 3 words could cost so much. The phone rang in the deep, unkind hour of the night, the kind that feels borrowed from someone else's life. For a moment, I lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound slice through the darkness. My first thought was irritation. My second was fear. No one calls at 2 in the morning unless something has gone wrong. When I reached for the phone and saw my son's name, my chest tightened. Weeks had passed since our last conversation, weeks filled with a silence so deliberate it felt like punishment. I had learned to live inside that quiet, even though it scraped at me from the inside. Seeing his name again felt like reopening a wound that hadn't healed. "Hello," I said, my voice rough with sleep. "Mom," the way he said it stopped me cold. Gone was the controlled, authoritative tone he'd used before. This voice was thin, frayed, barely holding together. "Mom, I need you." I sat up immediately, pulling the blanket around my shoulders, as if it could protect me from what was coming. In the background, I heard raised voices, angry, sharp, overlapping. A woman's voice, shrill with accusation. Another voice, older, colder, cutting through like a blade. I recognized it instantly. "What's happening?" I asked. "They kicked me out," he whispered, and the word out sounded like it had been torn from his throat. "Her mother said I'm disrespectful, that I owe them everything. She said, if I can't control you, I can't control my own family." Control you. Those 2 words landed with a sickening clarity. In that instant, everything rearranged itself in my mind, the demand for an apology, the outrage when I refused, the pressure placed on him. This had never been about feelings or misunderstandings. It had been a test, a demonstration of power, and I had failed it, not by bowing, but by standing. "Where are you?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. "In the car," he said. "I don't know where to go." I swung my legs out of bed, my heart pounding. The house felt suddenly awake, as if it sensed what was happening. "Come here," I said without hesitation. "You always have a place here." There was a sound on the line that might have been a sob, or a breath that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tumbling over each other. "I was wrong. I thought keeping the peace meant making everyone else bend. I didn't think they'd turn on me." "They didn't turn on you," I said quietly. "They showed you who they are." He arrived before dawn. I watched from the window as his car pulled up, the headlights cutting through the pale morning mist. He sat there for a moment before getting out, his shoulders slumped, his movements slow, as if the weight of the night had pressed him down. When he finally stepped inside, he looked smaller, not physically, but in a way that made my heart ache. This wasn't the confident man I'd spoken to weeks earlier. This was the child I used to comfort after nightmares. I didn't lecture him. I didn't ask for explanations. I put the kettle on and handed him a mug of tea, the same way I had when he was young and couldn't sleep. He wrapped his hands around it like a lifeline. "They went through my phone," he said after a while, staring into the cup. "Her mother did. She said a man with nothing to hide shouldn't be defensive. She found old messages, times I defended you. She said it proved I was never fully loyal." I felt a familiar sting, but it was dulled now by something heavier understanding. "And your wife?" I asked gently. He swallowed. "She didn't stop her. She just sat there. When her mother said you were a problem that needed to be handled, she didn't disagree." The room felt colder, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they confirmed. Love in that house had conditions. Approval was currency, and the moment he failed to pay the price, the door closed. "They said if I couldn't make you apologize, it meant you still controlled me," he continued. "That I wasn't a real husband, that I was weak, weak for refusing to humiliate his own mother." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Strength doesn't always look like silence," I said. "Sometimes it looks like saying no and standing alone." That's when he broke. His shoulders shook, and he pressed his face into his hands, crying openly, helplessly, the way he hadn't since he was a child. I let him cry. I didn't rush him. Some lessons arrive wrapped in pain, and they need time to settle. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red and exhausted. "I'm sorry," he said again, "for asking you to apologize, for making you feel small. I thought I was choosing my marriage. I didn't realize I was being trained." Trained, the word was painfully accurate. In the days that followed, he stayed with me, not as a guest, but as a son returning to a place that asked nothing of him except honesty. Slowly, pieces of the story came out. How every decision in his marriage passed through her mother's approval. How money, holidays, even arguments were monitored. How affection was given when he complied and withdrawn when he questioned. I kept telling myself it was normal, he admitted one evening. That this is just how families are. I thought if I just tried harder, it would get easier. "It rarely does," I said. "Control only tightens when it's fed." Weeks passed. He began to look like himself again. He made plans. He spoke about boundaries, about therapy, about rebuilding his life on terms that didn't require anyone else's permission. As for me, I never apologized. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because those 3 words I'd spoken carried truth that couldn't be undone. I raised better, and in the end, he proved it himself.